Our memory and our senses no longer recall what it feels like to have predators. The only traces of that era of when we still lived in trees are manifested at night. When you go from your room to the kitchen with the lights off is an example. The natural fear of the dark has its origin. It comes from times when other animals hunted us. The fact of seeing faces where there are none is also a defense mechanism of those times. But beyond that, we hardly remember what it feels like to live with that constant terror, with the fear of being eaten at any moment. We live relatively carefree because there are no animals superior to us. We are not the food for any other species. Or at least, that's what many believe. There are people in this world who either by bad luck or by mere chance were chosen to reawaken what our ancestors felt. The act of being hunted and not being able to do anything about it. People who claim to have been abducted by higher intelligence, living the most terrifying experiences you can imagine. And you will know their stories in this video. My name is Leonore Clay, and this is The Darkest Secret. Today we present the scariest stories that exist of abductions and extraterrestrial contact. Number 5. The night of December 29th, 1980 will be the date that friends Betty Cash and Vicki Landrum will never forget. Together with Colby, Vicki's grandson, they were returning home to Dayton, Texas after attending a bingo game. As they drove along a road, they saw what appeared to be an extremely bright light among a grove of trees. As they got closer, their astonishment grew greater, reaching its maximum point when they realized that in front of them was a huge flying object that was suspended in the middle of the road. It was shaped like a diamond, with fire emerging from it going directly towards the ground. The heat was so intense that it could be perceived from the vehicle. At that moment, Vicki told Betty to stop the vehicle so she could get a better look. Without thinking, Vicki got out of the car puzzled by what her eyes were seeing. Inside the car, her grandson was scared and crying, begging her to get back in. But Vicki was still hypnotized with that spaceship. She did not hear anything and remained in that state for a few minutes. After this, the object began to rise and move away before the astonished sight of the 3 witnesses, as 13 double-rotor helicopters, similar to those used by the United States Armed Forces, followed it. With the road clear, they continued on their way to their final destination. After a few days, the 3 witnesses presented some health problems: nausea, vomiting, fever, burning eyes, and formation of blisters on their body. Vicki Landrum's medical test determined that she had suffered intense exposure to radiation when exiting the vehicle. Over time, Vicki and Betty phoned the authorities to report what happened. NASA took over the investigation, but no report was found by the government or the Army. Therefore, they presented a lawsuit to the state demanding compensation for the damages they had suffered, as they were convinced that that night the Air Force was following or escorting a UFO. Due to the lack of evidence, the lawsuit was not successful in linking the Air Force directly or indirectly to the event. The strangest thing is that when reporters began asking questions to the residents, they claimed to have heard and seen those Army planes, confirming that at least the planes did go through town that night. But as always, this experience will remain as just another filed case that will never have a clear answer. Apparently, if it's real, there is nothing known about how extraterrestrial beings choose people for their abduction. It seems to be a mere result by chance, something that Prospero Munoz claimed to live but until recently, she didn't know what had happened to her. To understand this case, we must go back to the hot summer of 1947. 7-year-old Prospero, along with her 11-year-old sister Anna, were in the country house that her uncle had in the Spanish town of Jimena. One afternoon, something caught her eye from the dining room window. It was a strong blaze of white light that flooded the entire room. Immediately, Prospera and Anna go to the window to see where that light was coming from. Through the glass, they could see a discoidal object descending, and from it, two beings between 4 and 4.5 feet tall, dressed in fitted white suits with very thin faces and huge eyes elongated towards the sides. The beings ended up entering the house and mentally engaging in a conversation with the girls. The mysterious visitors seemed very interested in the phases of the moon that appeared on a calendar that hung on one of the walls. Prospera says they returned that afternoon and said they would be back to see her 2 days later. They arrived during the night. When Prospera walks outside, a third being, much larger, carries her in his arms to a vacant place. They subjected her to a medical examination that, according to her, does not differ much from what is practiced today. She remembers that they all had 4 fingers on their hands, except for one that had 5. When she asked about the difference, they answered that it was because the mother was a woman from Earth. All these memories were locked away in the recesses of Prospera's brain for 30 years, until one day something triggered, and the forgotten memories came back to her. Shocked by this, she assures that it was not the only time that she was with these beings, since they have been present throughout her life, appearing periodically. And although she now knows that some of her memories were erased, she does not hold grudges. In fact, she thinks that the contact with these beings has not ended. She is sure that sometime in the future, she will see them again. Number 3. In the world, many testimonies related to the UFO topic are documented. Some are undoubtedly false. However, when the protagonists of these are from the military, their testimonies have a greater degree of credibility. Something like this happened in the late 1980s in England, in a case known as the Rendlesham Forest Incident. At that time, the north of the Rendlesham Forest had 2 military bases, which were occupied by the United States Air Force. It was there that on December 26 at 3 in the morning, a series of strange lights were reported by a security patrol officer near the east gate of the compound. The military believed that it was a downed plane. However, when they entered the forest to confirm this, they observed that the lights were moving through the trees. The most surprising thing was that objects emitted a glowing light that they had never seen before. James W. Peniston, one of the soldiers who had entered the forest, also reported that he had ran into the mysterious ship. It was levitating on the surface. The sergeant did not hesitate to approach and touch it. As he did so, a series of symbols appeared. He quickly took notes, writing them on his body. However, within days, Peniston would realize that the message was also engraved in his mind. After this event, the military tells how the ship began to ascend, exposing its landing gear, which left 3 marks on the ground. Marks that were still visible the next day. Although senior Army commanders lower the profile of the case, many ufologists affirm that Peniston's story is extremely credible, since he was not just any ordinary military soldier. He was a man with several decorations. He even received a letter of thanks from the President of the United States for the services rendered to their homeland. Do you know what the most curious of all of this is? Later, a great deal of information about the incident was discovered, which showed that it was investigated much more than it was believed. Why did they want to hide it? What do you think? Number 2. The case that I present to you next is perhaps one of the greatest UFO mysteries in the history of Zimbabwe and of the world. Pay attention to this story, since it was dozens of students and even teachers who witnessed this. They were questioned separately, also telling exactly the same story. From what is believed to this day, what I'm about to tell you now is completely real. It was in a rural school in Zimbabwe that in 1994, and while on their recess, a large group of students witnessed 3 mysterious flashes of light that passed over them. When this flickering stopped, it became clear that these flashes came from strange ships that for a few moments remained static in the sky. Following this, the objects landed in a wooden area next to the school, and to everyone's surprise, 2 slim and over 3 feet tall humanoids materialized on its roof. According to testimonies given by some of these kids, the first humanoid wore a black suit. He had huge eyes, a thin neck, and black hair. Soon, another similar creature joined him. The 2 figures walked towards the children as if they were dazed. However, when they saw the presence of the students, these beings quickly returned to the spaceship and simply disappeared. The most incredible of all is that many of them claimed that the creatures warned about the devastating impact of predatory human activity on Earth's natural resources. Information that, believe it or not, that was transmitted to each of them telepathically. According to some ufologists who thoroughly investigated this case, were surprised by the fact that all the kids at that time told the same version of events, this being one of the close encounters that has had the most witnesses so far. The children were asked to draw separately what they saw. All the drawings matched in appearance. Number 1. And the case with which we say goodbye to this video corresponds to one of the most recent known abduction episodes, which featured Deep Prasad, a brilliant and young scientist with just 24 years of age, is an industrial and physical engineer in addition to holding the position of CEO of Reactive Q, a leading company in the design and programming of quantum computers. All these achievements and prestige were at risk when through Twitter, Deep told what for him was an abduction carried out by extraterrestrial beings. In his story, he says that on February 1st, 2019, at 9:40 in the morning, he lived the most shocking experience of his life. He remembers that from one moment to another, and without explanation, he was completely immobile on his bed. While he was thinking about how he had gotten there, he saw 3 entities standing at the foot of his bed, which projected hundreds of sentences and paragraphs in a language that seemed like a mix of Japanese and Egyptian hieroglyphics. He was afraid of not being able to move and was not in control of the situation. However, he could think perfectly. He was lucid the entire time. Despite the fear, he tried to make sense of the symbols, which kept changing rapidly, and the only word in English he saw at least 3 times was the word DNA. So it meant that whoever or whatever was doing this understood English. Beautiful sparkles and golden holograms emanated from their suits, which also jumped around him. At which point, one being approached him and put a light on his head, a moment in which, according to him, it completely changed his concept of life, his spirituality, and his union with the universe. The fear disappeared, and a sense of fascination, peace, and joy invaded his entire being. After that, he was unconscious for a few moments, and when he woke up, everything was over. He says that all this lasted at least 30 minutes. However, when he saw his watch, he was surprised to notice that he had hardly spent a minute in this state. He couldn't believe that time hadn't passed, adding that all this happened to him at an interesting moment in his life. Although he cannot assure it, he thinks that in one way or another, His experience is linked to his profession as a scientist, an intriguing recent case that undoubtedly, and like the others you saw in this video, no one has left indifferent. I hope you liked this video because we have come to an end. My name is Leonore Clay, and this was The Darkest Secret.